Welcome to First Look, Washington Post Live's one-stop shop for news and analysis. I'm Jonathan Capehart, associate editor at the Washington Post. Donald Trump's former fixer, someone who worked for him for a decade, was on the stand for 3 days this week in the Manhattan DA's hush money election interference case against the former president. And yesterday was perhaps the most dramatic. Joining me now, Devlin Barrett, national security reporter for the Washington Post, who has been inside the courtroom. Devlin, welcome to First Look.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan.
Um, Devlin, so did Cohen help or hurt the case against Trump, especially after yesterday's testimony?
I think yesterday was a bad day for Michael Cohen because I think the defense really raised some questions about whether not only is he telling the truth, but can he tell the truth? So I think that was a bad day for Cohen, but the prosecutors are really pinning their hopes on the prior 2 days of testimony, the things he said about what Trump knew and did about these hush money payments. Because if you had to make a decision on this case based on what happened yesterday, I don't think that would, just based on what happened yesterday, I don't think that would go well for prosecutors.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about, in the grand scheme of things, how long did that part of the testimony take up? Was it like 10, 15 minutes compared to the like 14, 16 hours Cohen has been on the stand this week?
So the cross examination by the defense was all day Thursday, and there were a couple hours of it also on Tuesday, and he was on direct for basically a day and a half. So there has been a lot of cross examination. There will be more defense questioning of Michael Cohen on Monday. Um, but I think that the pace of this thing has been overall very fast. But in some ways, Cohen is the slowest part of the trial because so much depends on Cohen's credibility.
And on that, Trump's legal team has used Cohen's perjury conviction and history of lying to try to undermine his credibility before the jury. Did they succeed?
I think they scored some real points on him yesterday. Now, covering a trial in real time, what you really want to know is what does the jury think? And we really can't know that. The analogy I always use is it's a little like watching a basketball game when you can never see the score. You know who's playing well, you know who's playing badly, but at the end of the day, you don't know the most important thing, which is what does the jury think? But I do think the defense did some really damaging back and forth with Cohen on Thursday, and the jury's going to spend the whole weekend, a long weekend, chewing on that.
Okay, Devin, let's talk about the defense, because so far, I mean, is it expected that they are going to, once the prosecution rests its case, is there any expectation that the defense will present its own theory of the case? Or are they just going to rely on, chipping away at Cohen's credibility like he's a piece of marble?
Right. I mean, maybe not marble, maybe cheese. But the issue here is really, a lot of defenses at trials, a lot of defenses will not present a case. They'll basically make the argument to the jury, we're not even going to bother putting a witness on because the government case is so weak. Sometimes that works. Most of the time it does not because most defendants lose at trial. But here, I think there's an open question. There's a couple witnesses, small number of witnesses the defense has been considering calling. They don't sound like earth-shaking witnesses. I do think one potential dynamic we have to wait and see on is whether Trump decides to actually call someone else who had interactions with Michael Cohen, who would say Michael Cohen is unreliable on these issues, on these allegations. That could be an important witness in theory. But I also think the way the lawyers are talking, they're clearly preparing for a scenario in which they don't really call their defense cases, that last a couple of hours at best, not a big defense case.
Okay, so then that means that the possibility of Donald Trump himself taking the stand, which, no, from what I understand, defendants rarely take the stand
Right.
in their own defense in these kinds of cases. But this is also a guy who, walks out into that pen there outside the courtroom and mules for however long he can about how his voice is being, squelched and he can't speak because of the gag order. But he could speak. He could testify in his own behalf, couldn't he?
He absolutely could. I think it's a very dicey proposition for defendants generally. Like you said, you're absolutely right. It's also a dicey proposition for him specifically because, if you think the Michael Cohen cross is rough, wait till you just try to imagine a Donald Trump cross and all the things you do to attack his credibility. I mean, the fact checks alone could go on for weeks. So, look, I think the odds are still very much against Trump testifying ultimately. But the thing you always have to keep in mind, especially in a trial like this, is that it's pretty clear that Donald Trump, the lead lawyer in this case, is essentially Donald Trump, and
Right.
he's going to make the decision. I would be surprised if that decision ends up being yes, he'll testify, but it's up to him. And there's a cat and mouse game to all this, right? Like defense attorneys do not want to tell the prosecutors until the last possible minute if the defendant's going to take the stand. So we're gonna watch this cat and mouse game play out, but I still think the odds are against it.
Let's talk about the jury. Can you talk about the dynamic inside the courtroom yesterday? Was there any kind of interaction between Trump and Cohen? And how engaged was the jury with Cohen's testimony, especially during cross-examination?
So I got to tell you, I love juries. I think they are the best people in the legal system. They're the people who finally have to administer common sense to a set of things that often like goes off the rails in terms of perspective. This jury is incredibly focused on all the evidence. There has been some dull moments in the testimony because there are always dull moments in trial testimony. They have not really, gotten distracted. They have been paying very close attention, particularly to Michael Cohen. I think they already understand. You can't read too much into their faces, right? But it's very clear to me that they are very focused on Cohen. They understand on some level that he is important to the case because all the witnesses have been talking about him this entire time. And as far as the Cohen Trump interplay, the only noticeable thing I would tell you is that for lots of the witnesses, Trump will sort of sit in the defense table with his eyes closed, listening, but just with his eyes closed, almost as if he doesn't want to take in any more of this than he has to. With Cohen, his eyes are open a lot more. He's watching him a lot more. There is a much more. He seems much more engaged in the minutia of what Cohen is saying. And from Cohen's point of view, Cohen doesn't really look at Trump very much. Cohen tends to focus just on whatever lawyer is asking him questions, and it's a wild dynamic. And one of the weirdest moments, to be honest, of the whole thing is Cohen has been very calm and quiet and mild mannered in all of his testimony. And then yesterday they played excerpts of his podcast,
Yeah.
and it sounds like a completely different human being. It's just like loud cursing, very angry, like just a completely different Michael Cohen. And I am dying to know what the jurors made of that after having watched this Michael Cohen for 3 days.
In full disclosure, I have been a guest on Michael Cohen's podcast, and I can tell you, um, I it was an experience.
Well,
It was an
and so
experience because the language is so blue that
yes.
I felt like like a nun compared to Michael Cohen during the podcast. What were you going to say, Devlin?
I was just going to say one of the things that I wonder about a lot as a reporter is I think a lot of reporters over the years have had a lot of interactions with Michael Cohen. So when witnesses, which we've seen for weeks, get on the stand and say Michael Cohen's a jerk, he's like always hot-headed, he's always cursing. To be honest, I think a lot of reporters covering this trial hear that and think, yeah, that tracks. Sure. But you have to remember these jurors are hearing about this guy for the first time. These jurors don't have that background. They don't, and they're not supposed to. They shouldn't. But the jurors are coming to Michael Cohen fresh. And I think that to me is, I would love to get inside that process again, because you hear just little small bits of what he was like on the outside of the courtroom. And you think, well, how does the jury balance these two things? These are completely different things. So I'm dying to know.
Well, on that point, because I'm in the first week of the trial, when witness after witness after witness, beat Michael Cohen like he was a pinata at a birthday party,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and I always thought that that was the prosecution's way of basically seasoning him up for when he does take the stand what we've been seeing this week, the jury will look at that and go, yeah, this dude's not, he's no saint. Do you think that, given the way the prosecution has run its case, especially vis-a-vis Michael Cohen, that they succeeded in maybe blunting even yesterday's sort of damaging testimony?
I think it certainly helped because I think if you try to go into a case with Michael Cohen as the hero, your odds get worse, right? Um, I do think that like one of the things you always have that again the difference between being a reporter and being a juror. Reporters know that federal prosecutors looked at this case and said we will never bring a charge that's based on the testimony of Michael Cohen because it's just too it's too difficult to make a person like that credible to a jury. But having said that, these prosecutors looked at this case and decided that they could, but they are still ultimately saddled with who Michael Cohen is and who Michael Cohen was. And I think they have done a good job trying to, make that pain less. But I don't think you can make that pain go away. I think that pain is in this case. And the only question is, can you overcome the problems and the pain of Michael Cohen with all the other evidence?
Yeah, I think that the opening testimony, the opening of testimony of David Pecker, I think was a good sort of salve maybe on the wound that is Michael Cohen. One more question for you, Devlin, before I have to let you go because we're already over time. You're that good, Devlin. Talk about the spectacle of Republican members of Congress showing up to stand with Donald Trump inside the courtroom. You even had you had the Speaker of the House. You had a cadre of people who are hoping to be Trump's vice presidential pick. Does this have any impact on the jury? I don't know if you notice.
So I will say this: it is an interesting dynamic. It is normal for defendants to have essentially a reserved row or two for their supporters to come and watch the trial. So that part is not unusual. What is unusual is obviously the type of supporters you're seeing are high-profile Republicans and other Republican electeds. And people talk about this as if it's, sort of one of the audition steps for vice president on the GOP ticket. I mean, look, I have been in a lot of courtrooms over the years. If sitting on a bench all day in court made you the vice president, I would have been vice president 20 years ago. I will just say, I don't think it matters to the jury. I think that is a conversation and a kind of performance and spectacle and noise that is for public consumption. If anyone thinks this is going to affect the jury, I strongly suspect, after talking to jurors for many years, I strongly suspect they are misunderstanding how juries work.
And as we have come to understand ever since Donald Trump came onto the national political scene, everything these people that they're doing, it's all for an audience of one. It's all for Donald Trump. That's for me to say. You don't have to say anything, Devlin.
No, I think he's an important decider and audience in all of this, all of it.
Right. Devlin Barrett, national security reporter for the Washington Post. Thank you very much for coming to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jonathan.
All right, time for the opinions roundtable. So let's go to the opinion side of the Washington Post, where we will find Brady Bunch boxes, Catherine Rampell and Jennifer Rubin, both columnists for the Washington Post. Jennifer, Catherine, welcome to First Look.
Nice to be
Great
here.
to join you.
Wait, Catherine, is this your first time?
It is. No, it's my first time in a while. I'll say that.
Oh, okay. All right. Because I went looking in my records to see if this was a debut, and I could have sworn you had been on. But, well, welcome back.
Thank you.
All right. Before we talk about the trial and all of this stuff, we have to talk quickly about this incredible story in the New York Times. And I'm sorry if I'm springing this on you, but hopefully you've heard about this. The headline is, "At Justice Alito's house, a Stop the Steal symbol on display." And this is about the fact that an upside down American flag was flying on a flagpole at the house of a Supreme Court justice, 11 days after the January 6th insurrection, while the Supreme Court was hearing a case related to the outgoing president. Jennifer, you're the lawyer here, so I'll have you get your reaction, just your off-the-cuff reaction to this story first.
I'll use a legal term. I was gobsmacked. I think this was just even for this court that has become so politicized, in which the justices go out and make really politicized speeches. This was unbelievable. The justice claimed that his wife did it. Well, perhaps she did, but presumably he went outside his own home and saw this and did nothing about it. This is an overt symbol of identification with the MAGA forces. And for him to allow this and for him to permit this to be a symbol above his own home while he is talking on the court is simply an outrageous violation of ethics. And it really goes to the central problem, or one of the central problems with the court, is that they have no enforceable ethics code. If you remember the whole flap about no ethics code that stemmed from Justice Alito and also Justice Thomas's acceptance of trips, gifts from wealthy people. This just goes to show they don't have an ethics system. There's no enforcement mechanism. There's no inbox for complaints with the court. And so once again, I think the court is in the target of people who really have begun to question the credibility, the independence, and the validity of the court. And it is already at an all-time low in public acceptance. I think this is a horrible, horrible incident for the court. And I think they're going to be once again in the sights of people who think in some form or another the court needs to be radically reformed.
And Catherine, when I read this story, I sat there thinking, could you imagine the hair on fire that would be happening on the right if that flagpole with the upside down American flag was at the house of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or even the newest Supreme Court Justice, Ketanji Brown Jackson? I mean, they'd be calling for their impeachment from the court if that had happened.
Well, I'm trying to think even of what the equivalent symbol would be for those particular justices, right? It's hard to come up with a similar ethical complication. Not that obviously those two Democratic president appointed justices don't obviously have their own biases, aren't known to have or aren't associated with particular political leanings. But the idea that it seems plausible that a Supreme Court justice could show, whether through themselves or a spouse, for that matter, some affiliation or sympathies for an insurrectionist group, that seems plausible is kind of damning in and of itself. Like, as I said, I can't think of a comparable symmetric symbol that you might see other justices, whether Democratic president appointed or Republican president appointed, display. It's just bizarre. Yeah. And I think, again, if it had been any other justice, and you saw a symbol like that, you might try to give them the benefit of the doubt, like, oh, this is a flag that has, it's a distress signal, right? That it means it's not exclusively associated with the Stop the Steal movement. Maybe it was a gift. Like you would maybe say, okay, we shouldn't jump to conclusions, but we have all of this other context here with Justice Alito. Right. And his wife. We have all of these documented associations with particular political groups or donors that make it really hard to see this as something that is wholly innocent or a mistake. And again, maybe it is, but the fact that it does seem so plausible, I think, is perhaps the most damning detail of all.
A mistake. The New York Times story also points out that neighbors were so alarmed by it that they took photos of it. And I'm just wondering, why did it take 7 years, 7 years for this story to come out? But let's move on and talk about what I think is another affront, a little lower on the outrage scale, but still. And this has to do with the cavalcade of MAGA Republicans trooping up to New York City to sit in that Manhattan courtroom to, sit behind Donald Trump. One of them was Congressman Matt Gaetz of Florida, and he tweeted out, and we're going to put it up on the screen. There on the screen, you see Matt Gaetz in the background, Donald Trump and his lawyer, fuzzy, because it's like portrait mode, focused in on Matt Gaetz. But what the tweet says is, standing back and standing by Mr. President. Give him credit for his excellent grammar. But this language is exactly what Trump signaled to the Proud Boys in 2020 during that debate. And several of their leaders have been convicted on charges related to the January 6th assault on the Capitol. What do you think Matt Gaetz is signaling here, Jennifer?
Well, obviously, he's identifying with the people that Trump now calls hostages. And this is an outrage. We have gotten so used to outrageous things that sometimes we get numb. But understand, first of all, the little cult going on where they're all dressed just like Trump in blue suits and red ties. And they are going up, to give moral support in a case in which Donald Trump is accused of paying hush money to a porn star to cover up sex shortly after his wife gave birth, so the American people don't get a full picture of what Donald Trump really is in the 2016 election. That's the moral support that they are offering him. So question all the talk about Christian values and about family values. That's all a bunch of hooey. But more importantly, what they are doing and what Trump has consistently done is to legitimize, to stoke violence. This is an identification, a statement of identity with the Proud Boys. It is a way of identifying with Trump, and they are overtly in language and in symbols now taking up not an apology for the January 6th, but a celebration of these people. And I can't stress how symptomatic it is of fascist movements which use violence as an instrument of political power. The threat of violence, the reality of violence, is something that democracy absolutely abhors. We settle our differences at the ballot box and in the halls of Congress and through debate and through the legal system. But violence should never be on the table. And for Republicans, they have tried to normalize it. And this is one of the real outrages of the current Republican Party, and why this election is like no other. We are not seeing two normal political parties. We are seeing one that has taken a turn towards fascism, towards normalization of violence, and another that is an ordinary American political party. So I don't know whether this has fully permeated the electorate, but it should, because it is absolutely a turning point and an inflection point for American democracy.
I would switch gears and talk about the 2024 presidential election and the fact that, well, it's pretty incredible. To your point, Jennifer, this is an election like no other, because both President Biden and Donald Trump, in rather rapid fashion, agreed to two presidential debates, one on CNN on January 27th, I'm sorry, June 27th, and one on ABC on September 10th. And Catherine, there's been reporting that the Biden and Trump campaigns had already been having talks about debates before Biden released his video on Wednesday challenging Trump to a debate. I'm just wondering, do you think that Biden painted Trump into a corner by doing that?
Potentially, but Biden has been making comments for a little while now, as has Trump, indicating his desire to have this sparring match. Whether or not this was a precipitating event, I don't know. I think this is risky for both of them at this point. It could be a major boon for President Biden in the sense that he is largely viewed, particularly by younger, less engaged voters, as someone who's old, who's not with it, who's not on top of things, and he is objectively elderly. This is maybe an opportunity, I think Biden thinks, to demonstrate that he's at the top of his game, that he's fast on his feet. I think in some ways it's an opportunity like the State of the Union, right? Where he was kind of amped up and what kind of, right. I don't know how many cups of coffee or Red Bull he had. Yes, exactly. But that was an opportunity for him to show that he still had a lot of energy and stamina and could stand on his own 2 feet and engage publicly in real time with critics. Now, dealing with a house full of lawmakers, a building full of lawmakers, is different, of course, than dealing with Donald Trump, who is known for flooding the zone with falsehoods, all sorts of inflammatory comments, as we've just been talking about, coded language or not so coded language. And I think it is probably challenging for anyone, whatever age and whatever degree of debate training, to engage with him in real time, because it's just going to be this constant barrage of falsehoods and attacks and things like that. And as someone who has occasionally debated, obviously not Donald Trump per se, but people with that sort of mindset, it's challenging to figure out, do you let every falsehood go unchallenged because it's just this unrelenting stream, or do you ignore it and try to and just try to focus on your own talking points? And there are risks and rewards to both approaches. So it is, I think, still quite high risk for Biden. It's also high risk for Donald Trump, because it's not like he has been completely coherent in his political events, right? That he says all sorts of nonsensical things, incoherent. Pardon? Yes.
The Hannibal Lecter comment last weekend.
Yes, is he going to go on stage in this debate stage and say and praise a famous fictional cannibal? I don't know. But he's clearly very confident, and he surrounds himself with yes men who are probably not about to challenge whatever his approach is to any public event. So it's not as if Donald Trump is necessarily the most disciplined and well-honed debater. So, I think it'll be entertaining. Whether it helps one or the other candidate, I don't know. But clearly they both think that it'll help themselves.
So then, Jennifer, I mean, when I saw that they quickly, when Donald Trump quickly agreed to the June 27th debate, I thought, wow, now let's see if he actually shows up. Am I being way too cynical to think that he ain't going to show up? He's not going to show up.
Well, I have a piece on this on Sunday, and I actually talked to some psychologists and psychiatrists who have been examining Donald Trump. And they think, and I tend to agree with them, that Donald Trump talks a big game when he doesn't actually have to engage with someone. He goes outside the courtroom to shoot off his mouth, but he won't allow a prosecutor to confront him on the stand under oath. And President Biden, I think, did a couple things that were really smart. First of all, he got him to agree that there'd be a kill switch. So Donald Trump is not going to be able to interrupt. Now, he may gesticulate. He may look absolutely apoplectic, but that's a win for Biden if you see this kind of silent guy gesturing and about to explode while Biden is answering the question. And second of all, he got two real news organizations to call the debate. And in particular, the team at CNN, Dana Bash and Jake Tapper, are absolutely excellent. They have confronted MAGA people. They have confronted Republicans about anti-Semitism. They are really tough customers. And so Donald Trump is not going to simply be able to roll over them. I would also say that this really isn't about answering Donald Trump. It's about provoking him. It's about letting Americans see that this is the guy who talks about whales and windmills and Hannibal Lecter and eating hot dogs and water, and who still insists that he won the 2020 election. For President Biden, the name of the game, I think, is first of all to show he's completely with it, as Catherine said, that he's engaged, that he knows the issues, but also to remind Americans that this is Donald Trump and he's nutters. That's his goal. And I think Donald Trump is going to be a terrific asset, because I don't really think he can control himself at this point. If once it was an act or partially an act, I think he's completely unhinged at this point. And so I think President Biden is going to have some fun with him.
The terms both campaigns agreed to keeps third-party candidate RFK Jr. off the debate stage, although I saw a report this morning that Donald Trump is now like, yeah, hey, let him come to the debate. But is that a bad thing to keep him off the stage? Catherine, you go. We've got a minute left.
He's not a serious candidate, regardless of whether he hurts Biden more or Trump more. I think it's fine to keep him off the stage. I mean, maybe they can invite the brainworm instead to be his surrogate. I get why RFK Jr. is ticked off about being excluded, but
Sure.
I don't think that it makes a difference much either way.
In the 20 seconds we've got left, Jennifer, what do you think?
I think it's a wonderful thing to leave him off. I think it properly puts him in his place, which is a fringe character. And for Biden, any moment that Donald Trump is not acting out, any moment that the camera is not highlighting that he's kind of unraveled at this point, is a moment lost. So from Biden's perspective, it's certainly a plus to keep RFK Jr. out of there.
One thing that we also have to keep in mind is, if Donald Trump does show up on the debate stage, yeah, there's the kill switch. So you might see him manically doing this off to the side. But as we saw with his debate with Hillary Clinton, he's not afraid to move about the cabin. So I wouldn't be surprised if he goes and walks around near President Biden. But anyway, we've got so many weeks ahead to talk about this. Catherine Rampell, Jennifer Rubin, thank you both very much for coming back to First Look. Have a good weekend.
Thanks, Jonathan.
And thank you for joining us. For more of these important and fun conversations, sign up for a Washington Post subscription. You can get a free trial by visiting, is it there on the screen? Yeah, there it is. By visiting Washington Post, yeah, I'm doing it right, WashingtonPost.com/live. Again, Washington Post, all one word, .com/live. I'm Jonathan Capehart. Thank you for watching Washington Post Live's First Look.